All right. Thank you again for another episode of the Conscious Queries podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Persicino. I appreciate all the viewers. And so today we have a very special guest, an old colleague of mine, somebody that, I can say I shared experiences with that not many can say they've had. And so, it's a special interview. So I hope you appreciate it as much as I do. So I'm going to introduce Patrick now and tell us a bit about yourself for the viewers that don't know you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick. Uh, I graduated from Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado in May with a Bachelor of Arts degree in interdisciplinary studies. I'm very interested in religion and psychology, and I guess you could say the role altered states play in psychology in a
Right.
nutshell.
Right. And that's really interesting topic. A few years ago, for those who don't know, we had the very special and unique opportunity to go down to South America with Dr. Dennis McKenna himself and participate at Wikatika retreat where, we did multiple ayahuasca sessions. And, it was my first time doing ayahuasca. I've done a few things before that, but it was really my first introduction into that world. And boy, was it the best introduction I could have ever gotten, right? It's when we talk about set and setting, that was the ideal set and setting. So I'm, a priceless event that we went to. So it's been a few years since then. We've grown, we've gone through a lot more since then. So tell me a bit more about your journey since that time in 2017.
Well, I agree with you, Dom, first of all, that it was a very special experience and that set and setting, uh, well, the set at least, or the setting at least, could not have been uh, more spectacular for that experience. But I guess I've been interested in things like psychedelics and meditation and ways of sort of accessing and using uh, altered or special states of consciousness for years. And I've sort of over the years uh, arrived at this understanding that the psychedelic experience is best followed up with uh, meditation. Um, I'm interested particularly in what you could call non-dual Shaivism. Shaivism meaning related to Shiva, devotees of Shiva. Although, interestingly, these religious traditions, if you want to call them that, although they can kind of seem um, to have an anthropomorphic god at the center of them, Shiva, they sort of interestingly get into ideas that I would say transcend um, cultural limitations and cultural conditioning. It's very interesting stuff. Um, but one of the main ideas to non dual Shaivism is that there is really only one thing in the universe, which is actually the universe itself. And this is the non dual part of that label, not two, one, non dual. And the idea is that this force, out of its own free will, because it is so infinite and all powerful, chooses to incarnate. And you could say that it sort of projects within itself a seeming multiplicity of beings or agents. Um, and it does this so that it can have the joy of remembering itself or rediscovering itself. And as I've already said to you, I think that this is where things like meditation and psychedelics can come in. We know that there's a very interesting sort of brain mechanism that they've come to call the default mode network, um, which some researchers have gone so far as to call the neuronal correlate of the ego. And we know that meditation and psychedelics sort of have an interesting deactivating effect on this default mode network. We see great activity in it in people who are extremely depressed or extremely anxious. And psychedelics and meditation seem to have the effect of deactivating this default mode network. And researchers think that this is responsible, uh, at least in part, for some of the therapeutic effects that both modalities have.
Right, that's a really interesting point. It's almost as if the East discovered the universe, and the West is only now, with technology, coming to multi-dimensional simulation theory. They're really at a point of questioning the reality itself and saying, well, what really is going on right now? What is this thing we're in, right? The universe. And so it's a really cool time to live in, I think, and especially now that we have this kind of open liberality where we can openly discuss these ideas without any religious persecution or things like that. So you know we're we're in a unique position now to really map out the universe thoroughly, you know and there's so many interesting perspectives. And when it comes to Eastern practices, I really appreciated Alan Watts's take on Zen Buddhism, and those kinds of ideas with the Tao and the yin and the yang. Everything becomes maxioms, and then we don't know why these maxioms exist, but they're truisms. And it's interesting that they're highlighted in so many different cultures around the world.
Yeah, another interesting point is that a lot of these older Eastern traditions, when you consider what tools they were using relative to the tools that are often focused on in the modern West, modern industrial West, the modern industrial West is often more focused on biology and sort of picking apart cells and studying things in that way. And not that that is worth nothing, but
Right.
a lot of these
If you peel
older
the layers of
Eastern
an onion,
traditions,
you just find an onion, right?
yeah, and
Sorry.
then the tool that one of the tools that a lot of these older traditions, older Eastern traditions were using was meditation. Meditation was the tool that they used to arrive at um, a lot of their understandings of things. And they're not necessarily understandings that can be arrived at um, through a sort of more materialistic, modern scientific paradigm.
Right. And it's kind of like the current model of reductionism is kind of coming undone, where it's kind of there at the bottom line, people just feel that there's something much more complicated in the universe than ourselves, and that the greatest scientist of all time, Albert Einstein himself, he was convinced that there was some kind of you know there was what is it, divine intervention, or intelligent design, right? And so, I mean, intelligent design, that could come in many ways, right? And it's really cool to think that even Carl Sagan, a scientist, he would say we are the universe to see itself, right? Where the cosmos's eye is to see itself. And that is a really cool, interesting idea. And it just goes to show you that maybe our purpose is just to be conscious and to experience whatever reality for what it is. And there, we don't have to, there's no burden of there's no, you're not sinning, you're not, doing anything you're not supposed to. If you're hungry, you eat, that's just part of life. It's just, you were put into a system where, uh or put in a system where that we have to follow the laws of the universe, right? Because that's how the game is set up. So I mean, you know, it would be interesting to see beyond it, but I mean, as individuals, it's almost impossible, except for maybe psychedelics and for meditation. I mean, it was really interesting after the sessions we did. I remember the shaman would take us one on one and give us a meditation session. And honestly, I got a lot out of just that after the fact, just rethinking about the sessions, rethinking about the ayahuasca trips. And it was, that was really, you know, giving me a kind of a direction to go from that. So I thought that was really useful. And meditation, I felt like before, a lot of the time I didn't understand what it was. And, it's one of those things that you're constantly rediscovering what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to say about meditation and the many different forms of it and ways of practicing it. And one thing I do want to bring into this is just that I would say, as someone who's had the opportunity to study with real scholars of Eastern religion, I guess you would say, is that I think that it can sort of be tempting to lump uh, uh, a large variety of traditions that are all concerned with meditation into the same basket and just sort of talk about meditation in a general way. And I myself have been guilty of this plenty of times, especially a few years ago. But the more I've learned about India and the Vedas and the sort of rich religious history of it all, the more clear it's become to me that you just have to know which tradition you're talking about specifically and be careful to not talk about meditation in a general sense unless that's really what you mean.
Right, right. That's a good point. It's an interesting aspect too, especially now that we saw that there's different schools of shamanism in South America. Even there's, even different sects uh, of those kinds of ideology. And it's interesting how, you know obviously, there's a lot of reductionism that goes on, and it's very important to keep that context and to keep those, very specific areas of knowledge alive, and to know about them. So what exactly, what sect are you most interested in, and which one have you found to be the most enlightening to you?
Well, as I've already mentioned, I don't expect you to remember this, but there's something I'm quite drawn to called non dual Shaivism.
Okay.
And there is not just one modern organization sort of instructing meditation in accordance with non dual Shaivism. There are multiple out there. One that I am comfortable recommending is called the Universal Shiva Fellowship. Um, that is mainly dedicated to the work of someone named Swami Lakshman Ju. He's recognized as a non dual Shiva master. He's no longer with us, he was recognized. And there's a groundbreaking professor researcher named Alexis Sanderson, who I believe holds a position at Oxford now related to all of this stuff, who studied firsthand with this Swami Lakshman Ju in India. And we have Sanderson to thank for what is a growing um, body of people interested in this stuff today. I've heard the term scholar practitioner or practitioner scholar used in recent times. And I've met quite a few people who are consider themselves both practitioners of this philosophy or philosophical system and scholars of it, or at least people who aspire to take a scholarly approach to it. Um,
Right.
so, Universal Shiva Fellowship, I would say, is a good starting point. But there are many organizations out there interested in this topic.
That's really interesting, and it's it's a lot of it's very inspiring to see that even, you know, in the 80s or even before that, a lot there was a lot of people that would go to Japan, and you know, a lot of people would go to those places and, you know, dedicate themselves to those ancient knowledge and traditions. And it's really, you know, something interesting that there's so many people that are interested and passionate about it, that it becomes, you know, a way of life for them. And you know, it's recognized as something that can give you value and that can give you an understanding. And you know, even Terence McKenna talked about this, where people would call him a shaman and he would say, no, I'm a shamanologist. I'm a, you know, an academic of shamanism, but I can't be a shaman because, you know, I was not born and raised as a shaman in South America. And I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? And that's a really good point you made about the distinctions between these titles and these traditions that we have. Um, it's, you know, I was really perplexed when you hear Zen Buddhism for the first time, and you hear a lot of these things, and it kind of, you know, takes away a lot of anxiety, and it takes away a lot of pressure that the Western society has put on you, saying if you don't have these specific things, you're not successful, you're not, you know, building up to having an estate and having a big house. And so, you know, you're what are you doing? Are you making capital? Are you So it's very interesting to have, you know, a perspective of life where it's like, oh, I don't have to do all that. That's just a pawn game that these people have made, you know, a reality for us in the West. But we don't have to live like that. That's not the way of life for forever and for everyone, right?
Yeah, yeah, that is a very interesting point, and it does seem like it would be fair to say that these Eastern traditions of interest to me are often averse from materialism, or at least excessive materialism, and sort of encourage you to find joy in simple things. And there's also an interesting topic of the way individuals live and individual decision making, and how this relates to the collective, and how the collective in turn uh, affects or conditions people to think that they need X, Y, and Z to be happy, as Terrence has talked about, as you mentioned.
It's really interesting. There's a lot to cover. I mean, do you think there's a point of no return, or a point where enough people know about it that it kind of completes the wave of conscious reality, where we kind of come to terms and we all realize that kind of you know, ideology or philosophy of the universe? Do you think there's a critical point where it might change human behavior as a whole?
Uh, well, that's a big question, but I it does seem like, despite all of the chaos in the world today, there's a sort of growing interest in um, spirituality, uh, spiritual. practices. I think psychedelics and ayahuasca are a part of this, and maybe also a growing sense that something has been left behind. You know, Terence McKenna would evoke the archaic revival, um, sort of suggesting that there's something that was had, um, or maybe at least by some people or certain groups in the past, that we would do good by ourselves to reconnect with or bring back into our lives. And I think there's truth to this. You know, and I think that it is fair to say that uh, things like psychedelics um, sort of encourage people to question the materialistic goals that we've often been conditioned to have.
it's uh it's really tough conditioning to break, because for a long time the promise has been so sweet that nobody would ever dare walk away from it. And to the point where a lot of ancient aboriginal cultures in North America and South America, they walk away from the traditional life to join up with the materialist lifestyle. Because I mean, who doesn't want a brand new camera? Who doesn't want beautiful things that are constantly posed in front of our eyes? And it's the part of us is we are tinkerers, or we're inventors. So we're constantly looking for systems and patterns and trying to make them, improve them. And so it seems to me that it's very part of our nature to want to have all the creature comforts that we have, and to improve on them. And so maybe it's not all bad, but I think maybe the current approach, of course, is what the problem is. The not non-recyclable, non-sustainable lifestyle that it's creating. That's the problem. The fact that we extract metals from the earth and we use them to make objects and pots and pans. I mean, it's all fine and good, and I think there is a way of having objects. Back in the day, there used to be a quality of objects where a car would last you a lifetime, or objects would last you an entire lifetime, not just a few years and you have to buy a new one. And so maybe that's the kind of ideology we have to go back to, is instead of it being the bottom line is always money making, instead of it being we should make things built to last, so that they don't have to come back to the store next year and buy another one. But see, this is unsustainable for the global marketplace. So we have to look at businesses and money making it differently. We have to look at wealth as something that is inherent, and something that we hold as individuals, and not that is created out of the abstract. And so it's a complicated world. The more you look into economic policy, or you read Wealth of Nations, the more it becomes complicated, and it makes no more sense, or it's arbitrary reality, right? And so it's it's a really it's like a big knot of rope. It's really hard to untangle it. So it's going to take a lot of politicians and public figures, academics, to actually look at the world economic policy and kind of think of it in philosophical terms, or in terms of taking spirituality into account, and taking all of nature and all of reality, and saying, well, what are we doing? Why do we need all this preposterous constant you know consumption of wealth, where we need billboards at every corner? You need advertising on every single thing. There's a point where it's like, you make the piece of art for the sake of the piece of art. You don't make it for the gratification or for the money. You do it out of love, and that's the world I want to live in. But I mean, we're far from that, I think.
Yeah, I think part of what you were speaking to in talking about um, the sort of market drives that unfortunately result in the kind of rampant consumerism that we're talking about. I think Noam Chomsky would call this thing the global hegemon, right?
Right.
The sort of maybe mainly U.S. led sort of imperialist capitalist global machine, these just constantly expanding markets, you know corporations constantly looking for more markets, more people to sell their products to. But there's a sort of interesting uh, positive side of this, I would say. That maybe that's an oversimplification, but um, what I'm talking about is what I think Terence McKenna also spoke about, things like the internet and these technologies that dissolve boundaries and bring people together around ideas about how we could create the world that we do want. Uh, and I think Rosa Luxemburg, sort of famous socialist thinker, said something like, the capitalists dig their own graves with their creations. And maybe Terence was saying something similar with some of his comments about the internet.
Right. And that's an entire, the board of executives' job is to have planned obsolescence, right? You have the iPhone 6, then the iPhone 7, then the 8, and you never give them the whole bit at once. You never give them everything in one thing. You give them a little bit, or you make things inconvenient and then you sell them the convenience. And it's in this entire mentality of essentially ripping off people and taking advantage of human behavior with the whole social media algorithms of keeping you locked in. But and it, where journalism has become just clickbait, and how to get you out at the most outraged as possible, so you keep your eyes on it. And so it becomes, it became its own poison in a way. And it's a very unfortunate that big business is essentially controlling all the mediums of the internet, whereas opposed it should be a democratization of information, a democratization of journalism, where we shouldn't suppress any speech. We should be promoting or making it available for people to interconnect, and to communicate with one another. And I mean, there will be dirty parts of the internet. There will always be that. And so to ban things, prohibition doesn't work. We know this. So why are we trying to you know exile things off the internet? Guess what? They're going to create their own internet. There's no going away from problems like this. So it's about finding new solutions, and not just reducing it or simplifying it to just there are groups of people we disagree with, therefore we can't have a discourse, right? I mean, that's the opposite of a democracy, right? That's like, you know it's authoritarianism. And politics has become a scary place. And so for somebody who has studied politics, it is something that I'm less and less interested in, and I'm more and more disgusted by, because of the state that it's in. And it's not a place for it's not a place where people can come together. It's a place where people are divided. So it's kind of hopefully we can have some kind of as generations go into politics, or as generations and times change, hopefully we'll come to a point where we're a lot more in touch with ourselves, a lot more in touch with nature. And I mean, like, we can't just hope. We have to take these kinds of actions. We have to run for office. We have to become these academics, become these leaders of industry, and be these makers of reality, because we can't just be on the sidelines and complain. We have to take part as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And so I guess we could go back to you know some kind of more spiritual aspects of this equation. um I remember, during my session, it was something of a, when people told me, "Oh, you're gonna see funny colors behind your eyelids," I was like, "Yeah, right. That's, you mean dreaming?" They're like, "No, no, no, this is not dreaming." And it's such a game changer for me. And you know that to me is kind of a democratization of reality, where if anybody is willing to invest the 5 minutes to, or the few hours that it takes to do ayahuasca, it's kind of a moment of, a religious awakening, where you kind of, your entire constitution is reset, and you have to reevaluate your position. So I found that, something that was critical to changing perspectives and changing where I came from. So I'm really glad I did that. And so, it's so cool that so many people have gotten so much out of it. And it's still illegal in many parts of the world. It's still frowned upon, and it goes against that, American empire. That's why Nixon made it illegal, because if all the workers are all extremely intelligent and self-aware, then they're not going to want to be, the slaves to the corporation, or indoctrinated into their system. And so these compounds are extremely corrosive to society, or to the current systems of society, and they're the institutions. And so that's why they're illegal, not because they care about your safety. If they cared about your safety, they would make a few other things illegal, and they would, actually put money in healthcare and in, crime prevention, and not just incarcerating people. I mean, it's quite a weird world, where you have for-profit prisons, and that's not considered a grotesque reality, that's happening in the world. It's becoming, almost legitimizing a kind of slavery, and oppressing people because of their philosophy or their spirituality. And that this is a big problem. And it's been years and years, but slowly but surely there have been you know legislation in the United States and a few other places, where they decriminalized mushrooms, they decriminalized cannabis. And so we're getting there. We're slowly but surely making an impact. And so what do you think? Do you think that trend's going to keep going?
I do. And there's interesting. Of course, we know this, and a lot of people have for a long time. But there's interesting formal research that's been done in the West now by Robin Carhart Harris at the Imperial College London, um, showing that psychedelics often enhance a user's sense of nature relatedness. Um, so that speaks to their potential to sort of help deconstruct some of these paradigms or sort of conditioning structures that we're talking about, and which keep us from realizing a world that works for more of us. Um, but I see no reason why the trend toward greater acceptance of psychedelics would not continue.
Right. And it feels that it's becoming more and more accepted, and people have less and less criticisms towards it, because it's proven so effective, or it's proven to be, something of value, that it's, and now even the Catholic Church is, coming to terms with even the most liberal policies, right? They're and so that it's probably a good thing that they do that. But at the same time, it's kind of they're playing politics with their religion, right? It's become a political game. They're for power. And so is that even a religion anymore? Is it even a house of spirituality? A lot of questions to think about that kind of religions, where it's all based on power structures and hierarchies of dominance. And so it's you know it's a really interesting position now that, with secularism, we're able to, take spirituality without the religious part, and make our own kind of distinctions, and because at the end of the day, you're in charge of your own consciousness, and no one can tell you what your reality is except yourself. Because if anybody tells you they know what's going on, they're liars, because they're trying to get your money from you. The best thing somebody can do is give you their best guess, right? That's all we got as individuals, right? But for the most part, it seems to me the most plausible and the most in touch with reality is that, the onion phenomenon, where we're all just layers of the same thing, right? We are the universe. That makes the most sense out of every other philosophy I've come across. That resonates with me in any language. You can say that resonates, because it's probably the realest truism we have. And so it it has to have some inherent value if we can all recognize it like that, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with the essence of what you're saying. You make an interesting point about sort of not letting anyone else do your thinking for you. And it's an important point. And as someone who's now sort of dabbled a bit in the Eastern spirituality scene, there's an interesting concept of the guru, and you do pronounce it with a bit of a rolled R like that. I know that because of a class that I took as an undergraduate. But I think in an ideal scenario, the student teacher relationship between a guru and the person hoping to learn from them, or a disciple, I guess, if they're serious enough, is just one of trying to learn from another human being, knowing that they just have more experience than you do with in this particular domain. But there have absolutely been instances in which those kinds of relationships have harmed people, and there are, of course, ones in which the gurus have been power hungry, and so it's something to be careful about for sure.
Right. And that is a good point you mentioned, because throughout history there has always been a need for people to have mentorship, and to have, whether you're in South America and it's shamans, or you have in North America it's elders. You always have people, the elders, the wise old man idea, or the wise old woman principle of, they've been around, they've seen life, they've seen death. So you should probably listen to them, and we should probably take advice from them. And there is value to that, absolutely. And it's really cool to see where, certain cultures put more value into it, and what their values become, as opposed to others that don't, respect those values as much, or don't respect their ideas. Because it's kind of interesting where in the West we kind of put old people out to pasture. The way, there's they don't respect old elders as much as in older traditions in other parts of the world, where, you know before, you would look at an old person, and you would go ask them questions and ask them for stories. But now it's, oh well, they're probably bigoted, and they're probably, close-minded, because they're so conservative and old. And it's like, well, oh, maybe there's some of that, but try to look through that. Try to understand where they're coming from. Maybe they've seen so much pain and suffering that they've completely shut out their emotions, and this is what they've become. And it's a tragedy that we let them fall into that, where we should instead of putting them out to pasture, we should be loving them and showing them the respect that they're due. Because I mean, as you know, it's the whole idea of how would you like to be treated when you're a senior citizen? Would you like to just be put in a home and forgotten, or would you like your family to love and care for you like you loved and cared for them as they grew old? It's the whole, so, to me, the social contract is a very real principle. There's a very real idea that, your parents gave you the opportunity to have life and to experience consciousness. Maybe at some point you should consider giving back that gift and having kids of your own. I think there's some part of me says that the social contract is a very real phenomenon, and there is value to, having that relationship where we have, ultimate respect for one another. But it's not as always as easy as saying that, right? It is a complicated issue.
Yeah. It's an interesting point you make about how often today in the West, people, maybe particularly young people, are sort of averse from uh, the idea of respecting their elders, or maybe we could say the idea of discipline, or the kind of discipline which often relates to the elders that you find in some of these Eastern traditions that are of interest to me. And there's an interesting book that I've found helpful in a lot of ways called The Yoga of Discipline. Um, the author's involved with an organization that I have some reservations about, I guess you could say, but I like the book nonetheless. And one of the points that the author makes in it is that she notices often when she meets people what their reaction to the concept of discipline is. And she says something along the lines of that she notices that it's something people associate with school, and prisons, and these things that they've often had negative experiences of. And she's coming at it as someone hoping to uh, help people rediscover the positive aspect of discipline, I guess. And so your comments made me think of this.
Right. And it's that's the kind of the yin with the yang. It's such a reality where, if you the son of a prince with all the luxuries and everything doesn't really appreciate the value of all those great things. He doesn't really taste the fruit because he never got the hardship. He never felt a day of hard work, or, there is a value to that where there is no good without the bad. You wouldn't know what success was without failure. And this is such a principle that comes back again and again where, you know, and I'm learning this myself this year, right? Because of the pandemic, there's a lot of things where, well, because I don't have to go to work because we're shut down, now, the whole, system of waking up at a certain time and all these things break down, and it has an effect on my overall, my overall life, and I can see it affecting my productivity, and I can see it. And so, having discipline, having, kind of order, setting order in your chaotic life, is a practical, thing to do, especially as, time is running out, right? We all have an expiry date. So, you better get done what you want to do before that time comes. So, you know, I think it's an interesting idea. And so, what do you think? What do you think about kind of, looking back now on the ayahuasca sessions? Do you think you would go back and do more sessions, or do you think what do you think about that?
Well, I hope to use ayahuasca again. Absolutely. I don't mean to say that I have left psychedelics behind, and I wouldn't say that it's necessary to, just speaking from what my experience of the sort of overall spiritual path has been. I wouldn't say that I've found it necessary to leave psychedelics behind altogether. I think they're extremely valuable tools. Um, I what I think about psychedelics, uh, and particularly ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms, um, and I guess the serotonergic psychedelics in particular, is that they, if you study these Eastern traditions that I've been talking about, if you study non-dual Shaivism, they're concerned with a force that they call Kundalini Shakti. And they're also concerned with what are called the chakras. It means wheel in Sanskrit. You often hear it pronounced chakras in the West. The correct pronunciation is actually chakras. The A in Sanskrit is pronounced like the U in cup, believe it or not. But anyhow, what I've noticed in the course of my experimentation, personal experimentation, and in the course of my reading about these drugs, is that it's not uncommon at all to find accounts of people using these drugs and then noticing a sort of energy that surges up their spine, or these sort of somatic unlocking sensations or phenomena, which I've come to consider to be basically this force, Kundalini Shakti, at work. And it's sort of a radical understanding of things that I've not seen or heard anyone else articulate in quite the same way. Of course, there's a lot of interest in, I guess, the overlap between psychedelics and meditation, but I would say that I've arrived at this very specific understanding of what's going on, and I think that these drugs basically activate a force that these Eastern traditions of interest to me have identified, and that is why I made the point that I did at the beginning of the podcast, that I think psychedelics, or the use of them, is best followed up with meditation or the study of these traditions, Shaivism. Not for the anthropomorphic deity, Shiva. I'm sympathetic to how that turns people off, how that sort of thing turns a lot of people off, as someone who was raised Catholic and who certainly does not identify as
Right.
Catholic anymore.
Mhm.
But if you read the writing of Ralph Metzner, for example, you find in both his book on ayahuasca and his book on mushrooms that there are people who have these somatic experiences, I guess you could call them, that have unique properties to them, and they're similar to, and I would say, of the same nature as the Kundalini experiences that are spoken of in the context of non-dual Shaivism. Anyway, that's a big can of worms that I opened up, and I encourage people to check it out and sort of see if what I'm saying lines up with their own experiences, of course. And I think that that is what people will find if they take the idea seriously. But there's a lot to say about it all.
Right. Have you ever heard of came across of the term Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail? What can you tell us about that? What do you know about that?
I know almost nothing about that. I've heard the term, I've read the term, and I have a vague understanding of it.
Right.
I appreciate it. It seems to me to sort of represent uh, the cyclical or sort of unending nature of reality, but um, I don't feel qualified to speak to any more than that.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. It was really interesting. I remember listening to Alan Watts talk about it, and it's really cool, like you mentioned, bringing it back to its symbolism of the cyclical nature of the universe. And it's a much more positive outlook, and it seems not, and maybe not even positive, maybe just zen is the right word, because there's no other word to explain it, where it's not good or bad, it's just the way it is, right? And that's just a beautiful a poetic way of looking at the world. There's what was the other book that I remember you sent me a link to it. It was a book on Buddhism. I forget what it was called again.
I don't remember what you're talking about. I wish I did.
Yeah, no worries. That's fine. There's a lot of really good books out there. I have such a backlog of books I want to get to. It's but because of the holidays and I finished my session, I'll be able to cover a lot more books in the next little while. Do you have any books that you're looking forward to read this holiday?
Well, I'm reading a book on the Upanishads right now by a scholar whose name I think is pronounced Patrick Olivier.
Okay.
I think the book is just called The Upanishads, which is a topic of great interest to me. And my basic understanding of the Upanishads is that um, there are many Indian theological understandings, basically, that come after the Upanishads that are based on and constantly referring to the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are also very concerned with human physiology and these sort of subtle channels, you sometimes hear them called. The Sanskrit term for one of these channels is nadi, the nadis. If you've ever been to a yoga studio or a meditation center and seen some of these graphics depicting these channels running throughout the human form and a sort of energy flowing through them, this is a topic of great concern to the Upanishads. And as I mentioned earlier, my understanding of things today is that psychedelics actually activate the same force. And it would kind of make sense when you consider that both psychedelics and meditation affect this brain system, the default mode network. And Again, I'm not an Indologist. An Indologist is someone who studies India, is an expert in these traditions, but I have spent time with Indologists, and it seems to be the case that the Upanishads, uh, they're not just concerned with human physiology and these channels, but they're also concerned with how human physiology and the individual human form relates to um, the sort of creator or capital O one, that they also maintain is your innermost self. Um, so anyway, that's a big conversation, and I'm
Yeah,
not an expert, but
right.
fascinating stuff.
It's a very complicated question trying to, you know, trying to understand oneself, and it's something that I think everybody has trouble with, and it's something that, maybe that a lot of, materialism, it's kind of a way to try and satisfy that hunger, or trying to find that nucleus of, what am I, and trying to find that, and constantly looking for it. Because I find that when children, they're, new to our world, and they're constantly trying, they have a lot of input, and they're constantly trying to touch things and feel things and look at things. And I remember, I think most people forget this, but I remember a distinct feeling of when I was a child, looking at the world, thinking, I'm looking for something, and every single object I would look at, I would find it saying, no, that's not quite it. That's not quite what I'm looking for. And but in reality, what I was looking for was the whole puzzle itself, and not just the tree, the flower, the bee, but the whole synchronicity of the whole thing as one. And I think that was a really cool thing, when children are constantly looking for that trying to understand the universe. And now, as an adult looking back, I can understand what was really going on, right? And that really goes to show you that there is some kind of, the universe looking at itself. There definitely is that.
Yeah, you're reminding me with your comment about wanting to see more than the individual object and being interested in the whole rather than one part of it. If there even are parts, right? Because that's the thing about language, and that's actually something that these traditions maintain, is that it's language that keeps us from realizing that it is just one whole. Like Terrence even says, when the bird comes into the room and it's called a bird, it can have the effect. It doesn't have to, which is the kind of consciousness that these traditions try to help you cultivate. But it can have the effect of sort of robbing the experience or the creature or whatever of its magic and of uh, its interbeing with everything else. And this concept of interbeing is something dealt with in Buddhism quite a bit. And there's a book by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh that I'm a big fan of called Understanding Our Mind, which is an interesting, revealing title, uh, in which this topic of interbeing and related topics of interpenetration and interdependence are dealt with quite a bit. And the gist, I guess you could say, is that no one thing, be it a person or a statement or an inanimate object, exists in a vacuum or exists in isolation. Interbeing is the nature of things. It's inescapable.
And once you realize this, you see the reductionist nature of our politics, where you're either a Democrat or a Republican, and you, even if you know you're wrong on a certain issue, you have to vote the party line, which to me is completely arbitrary. How can you not vote your conscience, instead of voting the party line, right? It becomes so arbitrary, where we reduce things into these categories, or we like to box things up and label them, because we're very scared of everything. We're very anxious, and so we need to put labels and to put the categories so that we can define the world as simplistic as possible. Yet, like you said, when we do that, we delegitimize the entire picture. And it becomes where now we have a justice system, right, where it's we're all responsible for ourselves, right? You commit a crime, you're responsible, not your parents, not how they raised you, or their parents how they raised their parents, right? But in reality, it's all unfortunately part of the same picture, right? Most people who abuse children were abused as children, right? It's a tragic universe where everything is the cause and effect is constantly rolling down the hill. And it's there, I feel like there's no stopping it other than, I think, maybe realizing that it's happening, and not maybe not being so harsh on each other for making you know making those kinds of mistakes where we don't know what we're even doing, right? We're just following some kind of programming, and that can be very dangerous. And maybe realizing it is the first step to deprogramming that kind of conditioning.
Yeah, it's really a great resource. This book that I just mentioned, Understanding Our Mind, and another concept that Nat brings up in it is that there are these seeds, he calls them. It's a great metaphor that we water in ourselves. Um, that we can choose to not water if we become conscious of the process. And he calls this selective watering, and encourages us to water the wholesome seeds in ourselves and to avoid watering the ones that cause us and others suffering. And not only this, but he goes on to say that we can maybe unconsciously or inadvertently water certain seeds in other people as well, with the ways that we interact with them. And this, of course, gets back to the concept of interbeing.
And that's a very real like phenomenon, because it's so true. But depending on people you hang out with, it can completely affect your mood. It can affect your outlook on life. And so, and like you mentioned, the interconnection makes it so that the relationship is always ongoing, where you know you're helping me, I'm helping you, and we affect each other in that way, where there's so many different possibilities, right? When the what's the old saying, the if you flock with the chickens, you'll peck at the ground, or if you soar with the eagles, you'll soar with if you fly, you'll fly with the eagles. It's a real idea where show me your friends and I'll show you your future. It's a real idea where we can form our own life and our own reality based on the relationships we form and the seeds we tend to. That's a really cool idea. I like that notion of tending to the seeds that are good, and forgetting and not feeding the ones that are bad. Because I think there's human beings are capable of good and evil. And so it is in all within us all to really kind of look into that and acknowledge that we can be evil and we can make bad actions. But just the fact of not making those decisions is an act of self, watering the right seeds, right? Defusing that bomb before it goes off. And so, because self-sabotage is a real concept, and it happens all the time, especially when looking for relationships, people are really bad at sabotaging their own self. And it's a very strange concept when people don't even realize the barriers they have put themselves. And it could take a lifetime to take away those barriers, unfortunately. So this is good to have friends around you that are able to give you criticism and show you your blind spots. Because if you just have friends that are yes men and they don't give you any advice or good criticism, then you're living in a delusion, and you're not being productive, you're not helping anybody if people are just lying to you and saying, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. instead of
Yeah.
saying, actually saying, Mel, maybe you should look at it this way, or maybe you don't understand everything, right? Because a lot of the time we don't understand everything.
Yeah, well, that's a great point too, and that gets me thinking about politics again, actually, because the woman I mentioned earlier, Rosa Luxemburg, the socialist thinker, she said once that she was an advocate of what she called social democracy, and she seems to have used it in a broad sense, but it seems that she sort of envisioned social democracy as a movement through which working people, at least primarily, would sort of realize greater control in their lives if done well, and realize greater happiness through that uh, greater control. But she said something along the lines of that self-criticism was going to be vital to this mission. And I would have to say that I don't think that Democrats in the United States today uh, are always the best at this self-criticism. Um, there's a lot of people thought that the Democrats would win this election by many more votes than they did.
Right.
And so there's been a lot of interesting speculation and talk about what happens. And it seems to me that, well, there's one article in The Nation, actually, that put it pretty well, I think. I think they said, or the title of the article may have been that this election was the precarity election, or the precariousness election. And I'm paraphrasing, but the overall point of the article was that Democrats could be focusing more on issues common to working class people, things like good jobs, green jobs. Not that those haven't been focused on, but sometimes other things take center stage. And sometimes these other things that take center stage just don't make sense. I mean, I have a
Yeah.
hard time with defund the police. That to me
Yeah.
really
I mean,
seems to be.
identitarian politics really, it really boils down to the segregation, and it's a bad policy. It's not, it's something so passe to think of. We should treat groups special status, or treat people different. What do you think is going to happen? Resentment and even more racism is going to occur. That's why did populism arise, the Trumpism arise? Because the Democratic Party failed to bring a viable candidate that was not the status quo of corruption. And so, it's twice now that the Democrats cheat out Bernie Sanders from the primary. And so now, do the Americans even have a democracy if the people's will isn't even respected? When the primary, they say, well, Bernie seems popular, but we're going to give it to Hillary Clinton, and we're going to give it to Biden instead, because he's establishment, he's for the corporate agenda, he's not, a change maker who wants, the extreme idea that we should give people health care. What an extremist, right? To think that people should be cared for and have the basic, necessity, where it's so interesting to try having to tell Republicans, oh, do you ever get sick? Do you think you're ever going to be sick and have to miss work? Yes, you will. Okay, so here we are. We're at a position where you will benefit from a social safety net. I mean, it's not all bad, right? Because Canada's had a social safety net, and it's actually worked out pretty well. It's, it's not a perfect system, yet Canada's in the G7. It's one of the top, global economies. So, and we do have a social safety net. We do have a pension, so it's not all bad to have certain aspects of socialist policy or common, common values where we all put into the pot. I mean, it's worked out, the Americans really like hate socialism, but because of the Soviet Union, yet their neighbor, and a lot of Scandinavian country have very socially economic policy that have been beneficial to a lot of people. So and there's a reason why Canada and these countries have been a place where refugees and immigrants come to, in priority, because it is such a nice system of political, you still have a sense of a nation where we're all together, as opposed to an American system where you're on your own, and God forbid you get sick, because you'll get fired, and then you'll have nothing, and then you'll have to declare bankruptcy. And so it's not a system that accounts for human nature or human, fallibilities, where human beings get sick. Human beings will, it's impossible not to. So it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I have a couple things to say about all of that. The
Okay.
first is just that I don't know every little thing about Bernie Sanders, but he does seem to me to have a lot of good ideas. And another is that I do have sympathy for Republicans and conservatives who are skeptical of Democrats and who aren't exactly sold on the Democratic message here.
Yeah.
Um, I'm living in New Jersey at the moment, and I can tell you that there's an attitude that some of the Democrats and people like Andrew Cuomo, again, I think he has a lot of great ideas, and I don't know every little thing about him or his policies, but I'm just saying that there is an attitude that some of the Democrats and people like Cuomo, in light of all of this virus chaos, have sort of thoughtlessly shut businesses down
Yeah.
left and right without considering how such decisions and not just shut businesses down but imposed restrictions, this sort of thing is what I
Yeah.
mean, um, without considering how these decisions affect working people's lives adequately. And the article in The Nation, which is obviously a left leaning periodical, makes that very point that Democrats are not good enough at selling working people on their message. And so the solution, and I've read books of Chomsky's in which he says something very similar to what I'm about to say. The solution, I don't think, is to bash these working people who are not sold on the Democratic message. It's to reflect, it's to self criticize, as Rosa Luxemburg encouraged us to do, and ask, why are they not sold on it? What
Yeah.
are we doing wrong? And if you're honest, there are things that the Democrats have done that have uh, caused hardship for working people, I guess you could say.
Right. You can't have healthcare for all, and childcare and all these things, and have open borders and be defund the police. These policies, they don't correlate together. They don't work, because then the entire world would be, you know the entire world would flock to America for all its social services, right? So borders exist. They will exist for the foreseeable future. I agree that it would be nice to live in the Star Trek world, where the entire world is, transcended racism and transcended borders and nationalism. But guess what? We're not in Star Trek world where resources are not finite, right? We Resources are limited, and different countries have different priorities, different value systems, different philosophies, and people identify as countries still. So it's just the way that human beings have come to understand their political system. And so it's not right or wrong, it's just the stage or the level of political progress we're in, right? And so, right, to the most part, kind of countries is kind of like regionalism, or an idea where, you know, even in the military there are different branches. We all work to the same effort, but we're compartmentalized, and we have different goals in mind, different priorities. And there is that kind of camaraderie and rivalry, right? We're better than them, or we're the Marines, we're the strongest and the toughest, right? And that's a good camaraderie, and it's a good competition level, instead of being a negative and toxic competition where people are constantly in conflict. Instead, it's well, we have we're a bit more distinct and refined than you are. And so that's fun competition and more positive. And maybe we'll get to that. Maybe global politics and not, international globalism could, on certain levels, right, where we have different levels, where in a federation you have education is provincial and healthcare is provincial, different issues are federal. Maybe at some point we should have an international level where it's environmentalism, immigration policy, and other like really big impact things that should be decided at that level. It is an idea, but as of right now, like you mentioned, there's a lot of problems, and it's not all refined to the point where we can all agree to it. Because I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to make higher quality of life, better life for everyone. That's the common goal. So the we just have to find new approaches to that, right? Conservatives think that it's done through the innovation of the individual, right? Self-empowerment. And so that would give you the power to do what Elon Musk did. But not everyone are Elon Musks. So there has to be a middle ground somewhere where we do have some kind of competition, of capitalist competition. But at the end of the day, there should be social safety nets, and there should be some kind of collective effort. And it's not easy. It's not a very simple. I forget who said it, but there are no um, victories in politics. There are only trade-offs. And so it's all about the priorities that you have and you set. And we could bring in 100,000 immigrants or 1 million. It's not good or bad. It's the priorities that you set that fit what your vision or your nation should be, right? And is it wrong for people to have this kind of self-reliance where we have a democracy? Should we not respect the voice of democracy when a country says, well, we want to take this direction, or we want to take this kind of perspective on these issues? And maybe it's that kind of ideology where globalism fails to understand regionalities, or the context of every region. Do you have anything to say?
I agree with I think most of your points, if not all of them. These are complex topics that we've touched on, and we've touched on a lot of topics. So
Yeah, this is really
a lot
fun.
of food for thought here.
I think so. This has been, we've hit about an hour and 15 minutes. So I think this is a good spot to stop. Let's just do a little bit of a last statement. So is there anything you'd like to share with us before we go?
Uh, I'm not sure. I do encourage you and anyone listening to check out the book I mentioned, Understanding Our Mind by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's phenomenal. And
I'll have to add it to my list.
other than that, no, it's been good catching up with you a little bit.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This was a really exciting conversation. I'm sure there'll be a lot more to discuss next time. And yeah, so this is it for the Conscious Queries podcast with Patrick. Thank you so much. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Okay. Good night, everybody.